I've seen it happen before, but I never thought it would happen to me. The thought crossed Officer Marcus Green's mind as he stood at the back of the dimly lit warehouse, preparing for the raid he knew was about to go south. The tension in the air was palpable, the quiet hum of the city outside doing nothing to soothe the chaos that simmered inside the building. He looked down at his watch, the hands ticking steadily, each second pulling him closer to what he knew would be a defining moment. No one knew the truth. No one knew that Marcus, the man they all assumed was just another officer in the background, was running the operation. Not even his own team. They thought they were the ones in charge, but he was the one pulling the strings. His role? The one who would change everything. And they had no idea. As the dust settled, the realization of what had just unfolded began to hit the officers in the room. The tension that had once been thick in the air now felt like a heavy silence. Davis, still in shock, could barely manage to speak. His eyes darted from Marcus to his fellow officers, waiting for someone to say something, to explain why this was happening. But no one moved. No one knew how to react. The man they had looked down on, the one they thought was just another officer, had turned out to be the one orchestrating it all. Marcus stood tall in the center of the room, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos around him. His badge was a symbol of authority, but it was his quiet confidence, his understanding of the operation, that had truly set him apart. As Davis tried to regain his composure, his voice faltered. You're the one running this whole thing? Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. I've been in control since the beginning. The words hung in the air, echoing in the now quiet room. It was a moment of reckoning for everyone present. The officers who had once dismissed Marcus, who had underestimated him because of the color of his skin, were now faced with the harsh truth of their misjudgment. It wasn't just a raid they were a part of, it was a system that Marcus had been infiltrating from the inside, and he had been the one pulling the strings all along. Marcus took a slow step forward, the weight of the moment settling on him. He wasn't just a participant in this operation, he was the mastermind, the one who had planned every detail, every move. The officers, who had once doubted him, now found themselves in a position where they had no choice but to follow his lead. I've been watching you all, Marcus continued, his voice steady, and I know what you've been doing. This wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about cleaning up a system that's been corrupt for too long. There was no anger in his voice, no frustration, just truth, and it hit harder than any accusation ever could. The officers had been so caught up in their own sense of power that they had failed to recognize the real power standing right in front of them. But now they understood. They had underestimated Marcus, and in doing so, they had made the biggest mistake of their careers. The room felt colder now, as if the truth had sucked the warmth out of the space. One by one, the officers began to turn away, unable to look Marcus in the eye. Some were ashamed, others confused, but all of them were stunned. They had been duped, and they knew it. Marcus didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. The operation wasn't just a success in bringing the criminals to justice. It was a success in exposing the flaws in a system that had allowed corruption to thrive unchecked for far too long. As the remaining officers began to secure the scene, Marcus took a deep breath. It wasn't over yet. The next steps were crucial, but for now, he had done what he set out to do. The rest would unfold in time. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back now. As the team began to wrap up, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was more than just a raid. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would shift the balance of power in ways no one could have anticipated. And as he walked out of the room, leaving the officers to process what had just happened, he knew that this was only the start. The operation was over, but the battle for justice was far from done. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself standing alone in the back of the operations command room, staring at the screens that displayed every detail of the raid's progress. He had orchestrated every move, calculated every detail, and yet, the weight of what had just transpired still hung in the air. The officers who had once dismissed him were now in the process of processing the fallout from their own misconceptions. It was the first time in years that Marcus had felt a sense of closure, but it wasn't satisfaction that he felt. It was a deeper realization that the work was far from over. There was so much more to uncover, so much more to expose. But for now, He allowed himself a brief moment of relief. His phone buzzed on the table, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. Marcus picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. It was his superior, Lieutenant Emma Harris, the woman who had been part of the plan from the very beginning. "Marcus," her voice crackled through the line. "We're all set for the next phase. Are you ready?" Marcus took a breath, his gaze steady. Always. The next phase was already in motion. As the investigation deepened, the pressure would only grow. Marcus knew that the system would fight back, but he also knew that they were too far gone to stop now. He wasn't just in it for the conviction. He was in it for the people who had been left behind, for the ones who had been silenced by the system. His duty wasn't just to the law. It was to those who had been forgotten. He knew the risks. He had seen them firsthand. But what kept him going, what drove him, was the truth that had been buried for so long. The truth that he was determined to expose. As he walked out of the command room, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Officer Davis approaching him, his posture stiff, his expression a mixture of confusion and regret. "Marcus," Davis said, his voice quieter than before. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't know." Marcus regarded him for a long moment, assessing the sincerity in his voice. "You didn't know?" Marcus repeated, his tone calm but firm. "And that's exactly the problem. You never stopped to ask why I was here, why I was doing what I was doing. You assumed because of the color of my skin that I wasn't capable of leading." Davis's face flushed with embarrassment, but he nodded, acknowledging the truth. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was wrong." Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze softening. "It's not about being right or wrong," he said. "It's about understanding that the system we're working in is broken. It's about seeing the bigger picture, something you didn't see until now." Davis stood in silence, absorbing Marcus's words. The weight of their meaning was undeniable. "I'm sorry," he said again, more genuinely this time. Marcus gave a slight nod, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He didn't need an apology. What he needed was action. What he needed was change. "Just do better," Marcus said before turning and walking away. As he left the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the fight would only get harder. But Marcus was ready. He had the truth on his side, and that was all that mattered. The system may have been flawed, but Marcus was determined to make it right, one step at a time. Marcus sat alone in his car, parked on the side of the street, staring out at the city. It was late, the neon lights flickering in the distance, casting long shadows on the pavement. His mind raced as the events of the past few days replayed over and over again in his head. The raid had been successful, but the real work had just begun. As much as he wanted to relax, to take a moment to breathe, he knew that wouldn't happen. Not now. Not after everything that had been uncovered. The system was corrupt, and Marcus was just getting started. He had made his move, but now the pushback was inevitable. The powers that be wouldn't just let him tear down their empire without a fight. He had known that going in, but it still felt like a weight on his chest, a burden that never quite went away. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the headquarters, the crisp air biting at his skin. His mind was still racing from the previous night's conversation with Emma. There were so many moving pieces now, so many risks. As he walked toward the entrance, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The truth was finally coming out, but it wasn't just the criminals he had to worry about. It was the system, the very people who were supposed to protect and serve, the ones who had been blind to the corruption around them. Marcus had already made his move, but the challenge now was making sure his team could catch up. As he stepped through the doors, he saw Davis sitting at his desk, eyes focused on the computer screen. He glanced up as Marcus approached, his expression cautious but sincere. "Marcus, we need to talk," Davis said, his voice low. "I know I messed up. I didn't see what was happening, and I should have." Marcus nodded slowly, keeping his distance. "It's not about what you saw, Davis. It's about what you didn't see. It's about the bigger picture." Davis sat back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable but willing to listen. "I get that now. I've been going through everything we've found, and it's worse than we thought. I didn't realize how deep this went." Marcus leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "That's the problem. No one realized how deep it went until now. We've been working within a system that's broken, and now we have to fix it." Davis looked up at him, confusion in his eyes. "But how? How do we fix something like this?" Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the question. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. We expose everything. Every lead, every piece of evidence. We tear it all down and rebuild it from the ground up. But we can't do that alone. We need the right people behind us. Davis looked down at his hands, processing Marcus's words. And what if they don't believe us? What if they turn on us? Marcus's voice was steady, unwavering. Then we do it without them. We don't need anyone who's not willing to fight for what's right. Davis nodded, his expression hardening. You're right. I'm in. Let's take them down. Marcus could see the resolve in his eyes. It was a small step, but it was progress. Together, they had a chance, but there were still so many unknowns. Marcus knew this was just the beginning. As they began to go over the evidence again, the door to the office opened, and Emma stepped in. She gave Marcus a brief nod before turning to Davis. Marcus is right. We've got to move fast. The clock's ticking, and we can't afford to waste any more time. Davis stood up, his posture straighter now. I'm ready. Let's do this. Marcus watched as Emma started outlining their next move, the strategy they would need to follow. He felt a surge of determination. This was it, the moment of truth. But as they worked through the plan, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced toward the windows, the city skyline stretching out before him. There were eyes on him, more than just the ones in this room. He didn't know who yet, but he knew that whoever was watching, they would stop at nothing to try and shut him down. But that was something Marcus wasn't going to let happen. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let it all slip away. He would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. The next few days were a whirlwind for Marcus and his team. As they dug deeper into the investigation, the pressure mounted. The truth they were uncovering wasn't just about individual corrupt officers. It was a system that ran deep, far beyond what they had initially imagined. The more evidence they found, the more it became clear that the task ahead wasn't just about bringing a few criminals to justice. It was about dismantling an entire network that had been operating in the shadows for years. The tension in the office was palpable. Each lead they followed seemed to reveal something darker, something more sinister. But Marcus knew they had to keep pushing forward. There was no turning back now. As they sifted through the mountain of evidence, Emma came to Marcus with a file in hand. She looked troubled, her brow furrowed as she handed it to him. Marcus, we've got a problem, she said, her voice tight. This isn't just about bad cops. This goes all the way up. Marcus took the file from her, his eyes scanning the documents. He didn't need to read every word to understand the weight of what she was saying. The higher-ups were involved, and that meant their fight was about to get a whole lot more complicated. How high up are we talking? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the unease building inside him. Emma hesitated before answering. All the way to the top. We've got connections to city officials, even some in the mayor's office. This is bigger than we thought. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected it to be this deep. The people they were up against weren't just criminals. They were powerful, well-connected individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. And now, Marcus had to figure out how to bring them down. He glanced over at Davis, who had been working quietly at his desk, but was now watching Marcus closely. We can't go after the big players directly. Not yet, Marcus said, his mind working quickly. We need to take down the smaller pieces first. The officers who are still working for them. We take out the legs of the operation, and the rest will collapse. Emma nodded, understanding the strategy. That makes sense, but it's going to take time, and they're going to be watching us. Marcus didn't flinch. Let them watch. Let them think we're just doing our job. They'll never see it coming. The next few weeks were filled with late nights and long hours. The team worked tirelessly, following every lead, documenting every detail. Marcus knew that time was running out, and every move had to be calculated. But as they got closer to their goal, something began to feel off. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was keeping track of their every move. Late one evening, as the team was wrapping up for the night, Marcus received a call. It was from an anonymous number, a voice he didn't recognize on the other end. You're getting too close. The voice warned, low and menacing. Back off now, or there will be consequences. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let the voice rattle him. He had known this was coming. He had known they would. Try to scare him off. Who is this? Marcus asked, his voice calm. You know who it is, the voice replied. This is your only warning. Walk away before it's too late." The line went dead, and Marcus sat there for a moment, his phone in his hand, his mind racing. He wasn't scared. Not anymore. He had come too far to turn back now. They could threaten him all they wanted, but Marcus wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to stop until the system had been exposed for what it really was. He hung up the phone and looked at his team, who had been listening in silence. "That was a warning," Marcus said, his tone resolute. "But we're not stopping. We're going all the way." Emma and Davis exchanged glances, and then both nodded in agreement. They knew the risks, but they also knew that Marcus was right. They had already come this far. Now, there was no turning back. Marcus felt a surge of determination. They had a long road ahead, but he was ready. He had already exposed the cracks in the system, and now it was time to tear it all down. And no matter how hard they fought to stop him, he would keep pushing forward. The truth was out there, and Marcus was determined to find it, no matter the cost. The investigation had reached a pivotal point, and Marcus could feel the pressure mounting with every passing day. His team had uncovered more evidence, more ties between the corrupt officials and the criminal underworld they had been trying to expose. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Marcus knew they were walking a fine line, and the risk of being caught or shut down was increasing with each new lead. One late evening, as Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing the files, he received another anonymous call. This time, the voice was different, colder, more calculated. "You're getting too close, Marcus," the voice said, its tone threatening. "We've been watching you, and we don't take kindly to people who think they can bring us down." Marcus's fingers tightened around the edge of his desk, but his voice remained steady. "You're too late. The truth is already out there, and I'm not backing down. You've underestimated me." There was a pause on the other end, and then a low, menacing laugh. "Underestimate? You don't understand the power you're up against. You've poked the wrong hornet's nest, Marcus." The line went dead, and Marcus sat back, his mind racing. He had known the threats were coming, but this felt different. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him. They were trying to send a message, and Marcus knew he had to be careful. He turned to Emma, who had been working quietly at her desk. "Emma, we're running out of time. We've got to move fast." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I know, but we need to be smart about this. We can't just rush in blindly." Marcus nodded. He knew she was right. They had to play their cards carefully. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. Over the next few days, Marcus and his team continued their investigation, but now there was a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. Every step felt like it could be their last. Every move could be their undoing. But Marcus was determined. He knew the risks, but he also knew that they couldn't stop now. They had come too far, and the truth needed to be exposed. They spent long hours in the office, piecing together the final parts of their investigation, putting together a plan that would bring everything crashing down. But as they prepared to make their final move, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. He glanced around the office, his senses heightened. It wasn't just the calls anymore. It was something more. There was a shadow hanging over them, something they couldn't quite place, but Marcus knew it was there. He looked at Davis, who was standing by the window, staring out at the city. "Davis, you feel it too, don't you?" Marcus asked quietly. Davis turned, his face tense. "Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's like we're being followed. Someone knows what we're doing." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He had felt it too. They weren't just up against the criminals. They were up against an entire system that would stop at nothing to protect itself. But they couldn't back down. Not now. Not when they were so close. The next morning, Marcus met with Emma and Davis in the command room. "This is it," he said, his voice firm. "We've got all the evidence we need. It's time to take them down." They spent the day going over the details of the operation one last time. They knew the risks, but they were ready. It was time to expose the truth, to bring the people who had been pulling the strings to justice. But as they prepared to move out, Marcus received a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was simple: "You're too far gone now. There's no turning back." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, his heart racing. He knew this was it, the point of no return. But he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when everything depended on this moment. "We're doing this," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what." Emma and Davis nodded, determination in their eyes. Together, they would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. They had already come too far, and they weren't turning back now. The team had spent weeks preparing, but as they moved into the final stages of their operation, Marcus could feel the tension building. Every step they took felt like a calculated risk, every move potentially leading them closer to the truth or to danger. It was the final stretch, and they were about to make their move. They had gathered enough evidence to expose the corruption, enough to bring the criminals to their knees. But as the day of the operation approached, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had received that ominous message the night before, and it had left a lingering unease that refused to go away. "There's no turning back now," he muttered to himself, standing at the window of the office, watching the city below. It had been a long, difficult journey, but he had come too far to stop now. He turned to Emma, who was seated at the table, going over the final details of the operation. She looked up at him, her eyes sharp, the weight of the situation settling on her face. "You all right?" she asked, her voice low. Marcus nodded, though he knew she could see the doubt in his eyes. "Just feeling the pressure. This is it. We either win or lose everything now." Emma's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They both knew the stakes. It wasn't just about bringing down a few bad cops anymore. It was about exposing a system that had been rotten for far too long. It was about making sure that justice was done, no matter the cost. Davis walked into the room, holding a stack of files. He placed them on the table in front of Marcus. "Everything's in place," he said, his voice steady. "We're ready to move. We just need to give the signal." Marcus looked at the files in front of him. It was all here. The evidence, the names, the connections. They had everything they needed to take down the corrupt officials. But Marcus couldn't help but feel a nagging doubt. "Are we sure we're ready for this?" he asked, looking at Davis and Emma. Emma met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "We've been ready for this since the first day we started this investigation. We've done the work, Marcus. It's time." Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. She was right. They had prepared for this moment. They had the evidence. They had the truth. And now, they had to act before it was too late. The next few hours were a blur of activity as they finalized their plan. The operation was scheduled to begin at dawn. Marcus could feel his heart racing as the clock ticked down to the final moments. This was the moment they had been working for, the moment that would determine everything. As the team gathered in the conference room, Marcus stood in front of them, looking each of them in the eye. "We've been through a lot to get here," he said, his voice steady. "But this is bigger than us. This is about making sure the truth comes to light, no matter the cost. We've come too far to let them win now. We've got one shot at this, and we can't afford to fail. Are you with me?" There was a pause, a moment of silence as the weight of his words hung in the air. And then, one by one, the team members nodded, their expressions determined. Davis was the first to speak. "We're with you, Marcus. All the way." Emma followed, her voice firm. "Let's do this." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The battle ahead would be hard, and the risks were greater than ever. But they had no choice. The truth had to come out. They couldn't stop now. "Let's go," Marcus said, his voice low but filled with determination. "It's time to take them down." The team moved out, their footsteps echoing in the hallway as they prepared to make their final push. Marcus didn't look back. This was it. They had done everything they could to prepare. Now, all that was left was to see it through to the end. The first light of dawn broke over the city as Marcus and his team moved into position. The quiet was almost deafening, the air thick with anticipation. Every corner of the city, every street, every building felt like a ticking time bomb. Marcus felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The operation had begun, and there was no turning back now. They had already made their move, sending the right signals to the right people. But it was just the first part. The real challenge was about to unfold. Marcus stood at the front, scanning the building they were targeting. His mind was clear, focused on the task ahead, but a small part of him couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had uncovered. The corruption, the lies, the system that had been built to protect the powerful while crushing everyone else. It was a system that had to be brought down, and Marcus was determined to see it through. "Everything's set." Emma's voice came through his earpiece, steady and calm. "We've got eyes on the inside, and we've got backup if we need it. Just give the word." Marcus gave a single nod, his eyes still on the building. "We move on my count. Stay sharp, He could feel his heart racing, but it was the kind of adrenaline that kept him focused, not distracted. This was a fight for truth, and nothing else mattered now. They had to finish what they started. Marcus gave the signal, and the team began to move. They spread out, moving quickly but quietly, as if the city itself held its breath. The streets were empty at this hour, the only sounds coming from the team's synchronized steps and the occasional hum of passing cars. Marcus knew that once they entered, the clock would start ticking faster. They only had a limited window of time to get everything they needed and make their exit. As they neared the building, Marcus could feel his pulse quicken. The weight of everything they had been through, the countless hours of work, the late nights, the uncertainty, all of it led to this moment. "We're in," Davis's voice came through the earpiece, breaking the silence. "Target is ahead. Ready to move on your word." Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon, though he knew they weren't here for violence. They weren't here to fight. They were here to expose the truth, to shine a light on the darkness that had been hidden for too long. They reached the door, and Marcus looked back at his team. Each one of them was ready, eyes locked on the mission. They had no room for fear. They had no room for hesitation. This was their time to make a difference. With a nod, Marcus pushed open the door. The tension was palpable as they stepped into the building. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. They moved through the hallways with purpose, each footstep echoing through the empty space. Every turn they made, every corner they rounded, brought them closer to the truth they had been chasing for so long. As they reached the central room, Marcus felt a rush of anticipation. The files were there, the evidence they needed to take down the corrupt officials. But as they moved in, a sudden noise came from behind them. Marcus turned, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure appeared from the shadows, stepping into the light. It was a man, dressed in a suit, his face stern but calm. "You've gone too far," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "This ends now." Marcus's instincts kicked in, but he didn't move. Instead, he stood his ground, knowing this was the moment they had been waiting for. "No," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This ends when the truth comes out. And that's exactly what's going to happen." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You think you can bring this system down? You think you can expose what's been built over decades?" Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew what he was up against. This man, like so many others, had been part of the corruption. But Marcus wasn't backing down. "Not now." "You're wrong," Marcus said. "This system is broken, and it's time to fix it." The man's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. Instead, he gestured toward the door, where more figures emerged from the shadows. The room was now surrounded. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He knew what they were up against, but he also knew they had something the others didn't, the truth. And that truth was their weapon. The team stood firm, ready for whatever came next. They were close, so close to bringing everything to light. The time for hiding was over. This was their moment, and they would not let anyone stop them.